They fined me $100 for leaving my trash bin out for hours late. For hours, I could have paid it and moved on. But instead, I exposed their corruption, tore down their power structure, and cost them thousands. This is how I turned one petty fine into a full-blown neighborhood revolution. Asterisk, it started with a flimsy orange paper taped to my mailbox. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a flyer or some random neighborhood notice. But when I got closer, I realized it was from the HOA, my lovely Homeowners Association. In bold letters, it said I was being fined $100. For what, you ask? Apparently, I had committed the heinous crime of leaving my garbage bins out an extra 4 hours after pickup. Let me be clear, it wasn't overnight, it wasn't days. It was for hours. Trash pickup came early in the morning, around 6:30 a.m. I had work that day, and by the time I came home at 10:30 a.m., the bins were already tagged, documented, and cited. $100. Just like that, at first I thought it was a joke. I actually laughed. But then I checked my HOA portal, and there it was, an official fine under my name. Non-negotiable, due in 10 days. I called their office, hoping to talk to a real person, maybe explain the situation. Be reasonable. But of course, no one picked up. I left a message, then another, sent an email. Got a generic response saying, fines are final once issued. No room for discussion. No appeal. Nothing. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. This was about control, petty control, and money. I started digging a little. Turns out, my HOA fines people for all kinds of ridiculous things. One neighbor got dinged $75 for weeds visible through fence slats. Another got fined for having a basketball hoop in the driveway for one weekend. So now, I had a choice. Pay the $100 and move on. Or do something else. I chose the something else. See, what they didn't know is that I work in data analysis and logistics. I spend most of my days solving complex operational issues, finding inefficiencies, and making systems run smoother. So, naturally, I turned that energy toward the HOA. First, I downloaded all their published guidelines. 42 pages of dense rules, formatting errors, vague clauses, and flat-out contradictions. I read every single word. Twice. Then I started walking the neighborhood. Not to be petty, but to observe. I took notes, photos, videos, times, dates, what I found. Gold. Half the board members were violating their own rules. One had his RV parked in the driveway for 2 straight weeks. Rule 8.7 specifically says, no recreational vehicles may be stored in public view for more than 72 hours. Another had decorative lighting up 3 months after the holidays. There were fences in disrepair, unapproved paint colors, even non-compliant landscaping. And yes, every single thing had a rule against it. But I didn't stop there. I attended the next HOA meeting. Oh yeah, I showed up early, front row seat, documents in hand. When they opened the floor to residents, I calmly raised my hand and introduced myself. Then I started listing everything. One by one, I could see them squirming. One Steve, I think his name was, tried to interrupt me. This isn't the appropriate time for personal grievances, he said. I looked at him, smiled, and said, oh, I'm not here to air grievances. I'm here to ask for equal enforcement. If you fine me for a trash bin being out for hours, too long, I'm just curious why we're ignoring the 10 violations I documented within your own leadership. The room went silent. People were staring. A couple even nodded. Then I asked the real question. How exactly are fines being issued? What's the review process? Who approves them? Is there any transparency? No answers. Just vague talk about policy and community standards. So I went further. I filed a request under the HOA's own bylaws to access public meeting minutes, financial reports, and fine issuance logs. They legally had to provide them within 30 days. They dragged it out, missed the deadline. I followed up, filed a formal complaint to the state's HOA Oversight Office. I got their attention. 2 weeks later, I received a flash drive in the mail with the documents I requested. That's when I discovered something very interesting. Over the past year, the HOA had issued over $14,000 in fines, but 80% of those were to the same 15 households. And surprise, none of those households were board members. It was a pattern, clear as day. Certain people, especially newer homeowners or people who worked long hours, were targeted for petty violations, while others, people in the circle, got away with everything. So I decided to let everyone know. I created a simple website. Nothing flashy, just data, charts, dates, violations, photos, a timeline of how fines were being distributed. I even included a section with anonymized but real quotes from neighbors who'd been fined. I shared it in the neighborhood Facebook group and printed flyers with a link. It exploded within 48 hours. People were furious. The HOA had been quietly feeding off residents who didn't know how to fight back. Now the spotlight was on them. But this was only the beginning. Because remember that $100 fine? I never paid it. And now they had a much bigger problem than my trash bin. I wasn't just some annoyed resident anymore. I was a one-man audit, and the board had no idea how far I was willing to take this. Things escalated quickly after the website went live. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the next week. They didn't invite residents. I only knew because someone on the inside, an older neighbor named Carol, tipped me off. She was one of the few people who'd lived here since the beginning and wasn't afraid to stir the pot. She emailed me a short note. They're panicking. Don't stop. By this point, the website had over 300 visits from our neighborhood alone, which was hilarious considering we only had about 200 homes. People were sharing it, commenting, comparing notes. One guy emailed me saying he'd been fined for having a non-approved mailbox post, even though his was the same model as the board president's. Another woman had been fined $150 for a flower bed edging that didn't match the community aesthetic. The more stories I gathered, the more it became clear. This wasn't sloppy enforcement. This was targeted enforcement. Strategic, lazy at best, discriminatory at worst. I went back to the financial records they'd sent me. That's when I noticed something else: vendor payments, specifically landscaping and maintenance contractors. The HOA was spending a ridiculous amount of money, tens of thousands, annually on what should have been small jobs: hedge trimming, sidewalk repairs, seasonal flowers. All to the same 3 vendors. I looked them up. 2 didn't even have websites. One of them was registered to an address 2 towns over to a guy named Robert, who turned out to be the brother-in-law of Steve, the HOA board president. There it was. Fines were being funneled into contracts. Contracts were going to friends and family. And nobody was watching the books until now. I documented it all. Every payment, every address match, every inconsistency. Then I sent a copy to every single homeowner in the neighborhood. No drama, just facts. A 5-page PDF titled, "Where Your HOA Money Really Goes." That's when the board made their biggest mistake. They tried to discredit me. An official letter came to my mailbox that week. HOA letterhead threatening legal action for libel and distribution of false claims. I almost laughed. I was just publishing their own records. I wasn't accusing anyone of a crime yet. I was just asking questions, so I hired a lawyer, just in case. A friend of mine from college who owed me a favor. He reviewed everything and confirmed what I already knew. I was well within my rights. Not only that, he said, if they pushed harder, I could countersue for harassment and retaliation. We drafted a cease and desist in return, with a formal request for a third-party audit of HOA funds. The letter shut them up. For a while, but the pressure was mounting. Residents started attending meetings in droves. Before, they were lucky to get 5 people to show up. K30. 40. One meeting had to be moved to the local library because the rec center couldn't hold everyone. I didn't lead the charge. I didn't need to. I had already done my part. The neighborhood had taken the torch and was now sprinting with it. And the board. They started crumbling. One member resigned citing personal reasons. Another missed 3 meetings in a row and was removed by vote. Then came the petitions. People demanded a full election redo. Enough signatures were gathered in under 2 weeks. And remember Carol? The neighbor who tipped me off. She ran for president, and she won. I'll never forget the first meeting she led. She walked in with a binder full of policies, thanked everyone for coming and said, "It's time for this board to remember who we work for." You could feel the shift in the room. First order of business. The audit. She approved hiring an independent financial reviewer to comb through every transaction from the past 5 years. Second, revise the HOA rules to be clear, consistent, and fairly enforced. No more vague community aesthetic violations. No more surprise fines without warning or appeal. Third, refunds. You heard me right. They issued refunds, over $8,000 in fines, were rescinded or returned within the first month of the new board's leadership. The remaining funds were redirected toward actual improvements, new playground equipment, sidewalk repairs, and community events. But that wasn't even the best part. Remember that $100 fine that started all of this? They formally apologized and removed it from my record. Carol even offered me a position on the new compliance committee. I politely declined, not because I wasn't interested, but because my work here was done. I told her, "You don't need me anymore." The neighborhood's awake now. And that's what made it all worth it. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about one fine. It was about fairness, accountability, making sure that people in power remember who gave them that power in the first place. And all it took was $100 and a little curiosity. That curiosity turned into an investigation. That investigation turned into action. And that action? It cost them thousands, not just in money, but in the grip they thought they had on all of us. So the next time someone tries to fine you for something ridiculous, don't just get mad, get smart. Because sometimes the best revenge is truth. And we were just getting started. 6 months passed, and life in the neighborhood looked a lot different. The old board was gone. Every single member either voted out or resigned. The new board, led by Carol, held monthly town halls that were actually worth attending. Agendas were posted in advance. Minutes were public. Financial statements, clear, detailed, and updated quarterly. But for me, the biggest change wasn't on paper. It was in the way people treated each other. You could feel the shift, like the whole neighborhood had taken a breath it didn't know it was holding. People started talking more, helping each other out. I saw neighbors offering to bring in bins for folks who worked late. Teens mowed elderly residents' lawns. It was like, once we got rid of the nonsense, the community finally started acting like a community. And while most people would have left it at that, called it a win, and moved on, me wasn't quite done. Because what I'd uncovered in our HOA made me realize something bigger. If this was happening here, in our quiet little suburban pocket, how many other neighborhoods were going through the same thing? How many HOAs were abusing their power, fining residents into submission, and getting away with it simply because no one pushed back? So I decided to do something about it. I started a blog, HOA Watchdog. Simple name, but it caught attention. I shared my story, posted resources, explained how to request financial records, how to organize recall petitions, how to build pressure without breaking any laws. Within a month, I had emails coming in from across the country. One guy from Arizona said his HOA fined him $500 for improperly trimmed palm trees. Another woman from Florida shared that her HOA towed her car out of her own driveway while she was inside the house. People were angry, frustrated, and powerless. But now they had a blueprint, and they were using it. I watched as small communities pushed back, demanded audits, rewrote outdated rules, and exposed shady backroom deals. And every time someone shared a success story, I posted it. Every time someone needed help drafting a formal request, I sent them a template. Every time someone got threatened with legal action, I connected them with affordable legal aid. It felt like a movement. But here's the twist. I never told them who I was. Never gave my full name. I didn't want attention. I wanted change. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just didn't want what happened to me happening to anyone else. Back in my own neighborhood, things settled into a rhythm. Quiet, normal, peaceful, until the old board president Steve tried to stir things up again. He started a new Facebook group, Concerned Homeowners for Order. Classic claimed the new board was too lenient and not enforcing community standards. He even implied that Carol was mismanaging funds without evidence, of course. Just enough to plant doubt. Some people listened, some didn't, but this time we were ready. Carol didn't take the bait. Instead, she posted the full budget line by line, hosted a Q&A, answered every question honestly. When Steve tried to file a complaint with the oversight office, they dismissed it without hesitation. Apparently, they'd reviewed the neighborhood's case months earlier and marked it resolved with improved governance. Steve faded after that. You can only yell into the void for so long before even the void stops listening. Meanwhile, I got a thank you card. It was from a neighbor I barely knew, an older guy named Mr. Hawkins. He'd lived here longer than anyone else. I used to see him walking his dog, but never really talked to him. His note was short. I've lived here 23 years. This is the first time it feels like home again. Thank you. That one hit me because at the end of the day, this wasn't about fines or power or policies. It was about people, about living somewhere that didn't feel like a trap, about making sure your home, the place you're supposed to feel safe and comfortable, didn't turn into a battlefield of arbitrary rules and selective punishment. And all of it started with that $100 fine. Funny, right? That orange slip they slapped on my mailbox, probably thinking it'd just be another easy payday, ended up costing them everything. The money. Yeah, thousands. Between rescinded fines, canceled vendor contracts, refunded payments, and the independent audit, they lost a fortune. But worse than the money, they lost control. Because once people know they can fight back, they don't forget. Once you shine a light on the system, you can't put the darkness back. These days, I walk my dog past the same mailbox where I first saw that notice. The sun hits it just right in the morning. I smile every time. Not because I won, but because the neighborhood. Did we remembered who we were, what we could do, and how strong we could be when we stopped being afraid of stupid rules and started standing up for what made sense? So, if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, getting fined over nonsense, getting pushed around by people who think a title gives them power, remember this: you're not helpless, you're not alone, and you have options. Start asking questions. Start keeping receipts. Start paying attention. Because sometimes the best way to burn down a broken system is to flood it with the truth that $100 they took from me. Best investment I ever made.